Every July, the Mission to Seafarers asks churches to remember the work of men and women earning their living at sea and to support them and their charity in every way they can. Given our gospel story today, it seems appropriate that we remember them today ourselves. Not living in a city near a large seaport, it is easy to forget how much our lifestyle depends on those who work at sea. 1.5 million men and women spend months away from their families and are responsible for transporting 90% of the goods we expect on breakfast tables and in shops. The charity, the Mission to Seafarers, traces its history back to 1836, to the Reverend John Ashley, who established the Bristol Channel Mission, being struck by the loneliness and spiritual needs of merchant seafarers at anchor. In 1856, the Mission to Seamen was founded, and it grew in line with the rapidly expanding British maritime empire. In the year 2000, the name was changed to the Mission to Seafarers to reflect the role as a society which cares for all seafarers, whether disregarding gender. The charity works in over 200 ports and 50 countries. In 121 ports around the world, they run, for example, flying angel centers, offering refreshments, recreational activities, internet and phone facilities, and the chance to spend time away from the ship. Can you imagine being cooped up for weeks and months on a ship? Harsh working conditions, tensions between crew members, and isolation from friends and family can take their toll, leading sometimes even to depression, anxiety, and loneliness. Chaplains and volunteers are on hand in the centers to listen, offer sympathy and advice. Ports are often far outside the towns, miles away from shops and amenities. The Mission to Seafarers provide transport for them to make the most of their short time on ashore. In cases of pirate attack, shipwreck, abandonment, serious injury or bereavement, chaplains, staff and volunteers are on hand to offer whatever support they can. The chaplains, of course, provide also services and spiritual support, prayer and quiet reflection. They're trained to recognize and respond to signs of post-traumatic stress disorder, and in the aftermath of pirate attack, shipwreck, or industrial disaster, they offer a caring response. Look them up on the website if you can. Their work is impressively faithful. Our gospel story today is a story of a group of seafarers, men caught in a storm on the Sea of Galilee, which seems small to us compared to other seas, but apparently can be fierce when a storm whips up the waters. Suddenly, they see their Lord coming to them across the water. No wonder the disciples fear to see a ghost. But Jesus reassures them, we're told, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." Peter, himself by trade a fisherman, then asks of Jesus what seems to be impossible. Like Jesus, he wants to walk on water. Walk on water. Why would Peter want to walk on water? Who in their right mind would ask for such a thing? And I'm not sure I can explain it, I'm sorry. What is the point of it? Yet the story goes on that Jesus bids him come. And to our and everyone else's utter astonishment, Peter gets out of the boat, walks like Jesus on water towards him. Now, if we take this scenario literally, most of us, I guess, will struggle with a certain amount of incredulity or ask God to increase our faith. But the danger is that we dismiss the story as fanciful and just ignore it. However, if we think of the whole story, the ship struggling in stormy wind, the waves lashing high, Jesus coming to the rescue, and bidding Peter to follow him onto troubled water. If we think of this story as an image of life in faith, of life trusting God and following Jesus, does it not all make much more sense? The importance of the story comes to us when we remember that it is told to us in 3 of the 4 Gospels. In 3 of the Gospels, Jesus walks on water and joins his disciple in a storm in the boat. The image of a ship has always been a popular image for the gathered Christian congregation, so much so that it has shaped our terminology of church buildings. We are sitting in the nave of a church. You could describe church as a stone ship navigating its way through the wild waters of political and personal life. But only Matthew has Peter ask Jesus to also walk on water. What's the point? Jesus came to live God's love. For us, he is the visible face of God among us and of his love, calling his friends like Peter to follow him, doing seemingly impossible things until someone in faith dares to imagine a new way and dares to set to it. Is that crazy? Or daring to live and love, and to love and live in a new way? Since Jesus is bidding Peter to come, many faithful people obediently stepped out of their relatively safe boat onto wild waters. Who, for example, would have imagined and thought it possible to abolish the lucrative slave trade which the United Kingdom was involved in for 200 years? Parliamentarians like William Wilberforce, campaigners like Thomas Clarkson, women, slave revolt leaders and Quakers all played their part in this. And the world is not yet completely rid of slavery, as the news keeps telling us. Who would have thought it possible to heal many diseases? For example, leprosy, until Gerhard Hansen discovered the bacterium causing this disease. Who dared to touch and care for leprosy's victims until cure was found only in the 1950s? But the many missionaries, some of whom even gave their lives for the sake of loving their neighbor. Who would have thought it possible to give free healthcare and schooling to everyone, whether they had money for it or not, and set about organizing a way of making it possible? It was not easy to achieve all these things and others, but how glad we are that what seemed impossible was achieved thanks to the effort and faithful striving of many. Anne Levin describes another boat journey in this poem, White Water. Watching that program, I remembered. Tiny canoes, turbulent water, people pitting their skills against the treacherous currents, swept along barely in control, dashing against rocks, rolling out of danger, exhilarated but afraid, reaching the finish, battered and exhausted. I have known that, swept along in fear of disintegration, thrown against jagged obstacles that threatened destruction, gripped by some force that almost strangled hope, calling on all available resources to ensure survival. Then, just at the point where disaster seemed inevitable, thrown from the turmoil into quiet water, space to regain my equilibrium, time to reflect and realize that in spite of all appearances, I was held by strong arms that would not let me go. When currents swirl again, I hope I will remember I am profoundly loved and need not be afraid. Peter went a step further. Walking on the water, he struggled soon, and then was in danger of being overwhelmed. When he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me!" Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him. Paul, fully knowing human weakness, encourages us to believe the good news of Jesus, the Son of God, who came to save us and everyone with and through his love. Believe, he urges us. Have faith, that is, trust in God with your heart, and let your mouth speak of this good news and be its messenger. When Peter steps out of the boat, he trusts Jesus. He obeys him, and thus his faith becomes real. What good does it do if we just say hello to God here in the pews and then forget about everything when we leave? Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who struggled hard and long about his active involvement in resisting the Nazi regime, gave us this interpretation. Peter had to leave the ship and risk his life on the sea in order to learn both his own weakness and the almighty power of his Lord. If Peter had not taken the risk, he would never have learned the meaning of faith. The road to faith passes through obedience to the call of Jesus. Unless a definitive step is demanded, the call vanishes into thin air, and if people imagine that they can follow Jesus without taking this step, they are deluding themselves like fanatics. Most of us here do not have to brave the wild and dangerous sea for a living. Nor do we have to use the flimsiest of vessels to escape warfare, torture, or climate change and become refugees. But we too have to leave what boat we found and walk like Peter on sometimes very unsecure surfaces in our lives. Keep your eye on the Lord in prayer and praise as you go. Listen in your prayers for his call, come. We are all called to come to him and be bearers of good news. And if the storms come, remember Dietrich Bonhoeffer's experience that God will give you strength, but not in advance. May God bless your traveling and your faith and increase it daily. Amen.